This pillar bears the lion capital that is India's emblem today. Pillars and rocks along the boundaries of his empire bore edicts that proclaimed his accomplishments, his laws, and his Buddhist beliefs. On a pillar he erected at Sanchi is a condemnation of those who create dissension within the monastic community, saying in part,
"It is my desire that the Sangha may endure forever as a united body."
Hoping to bring the Buddha's presence to people all over his empire, Ashoka gathered the relics of the Buddha from where they had originally been buried and distributed them among a vast number of stupas. One of these he built at Sanchi. Why did Ashoka choose this site? Possibly because the nearby town of Vidisha was the home of his beloved queen Devi, who is seen here with Ashoka and another wife. The Ashokan stupa was a simple brick mound. The elaborate stupa we see today came into being 200 years later. As time passed, a monastery grew up at Sanchi. In the 1st century BC, its leaders undertook to rebuild the stupa. Prior to this time, buildings had been constructed of brick and wood. Rebuilding the stupa in stone was a momentous innovation. The stupa was doubled in size. The mound and the walkway around it were paved with slabs of purplish sandstone cut from Sanchi Hill itself. A railing of creamy white sandstone set the stupa apart as sacred space. And gateways too were carved of white sandstone. It is not surprising that some parts of the stone structure look as if they were still made of wood. The railings and gateways are covered with carvings. Worshippers, celebrants, mythical beings and figures from Buddhist scriptures throng across the surfaces. Stairs rise to an upper path 4.5 meters above the ground, also for circumambulation. As the visitor mounts the stairs and circles the upper gallery, he or she is drawn closer and closer to the heart of the Buddha's presence. From where did the funds come for such a monumental undertaking? Art scholar Vidya Dehejia gives us the surprising answer.
An ancient inscription tells us that this rail pillar was gifted by banker Nagila. This one was a gift of Pusa, a female lay worshipper from Ujjain. Clearly, women had their own money and could use it as they wished. Gift of nun Yaki from Valivahana. Intriguing to find that nuns could make gifts. And monks too. Gift of monk Dhammarakita from Ujjain. Apparently, monks and nuns didn't surrender all their worldly goods upon entering the order. Here is a gift from writer Mulagiri, and another from a merchant Isigutta. There are joint donations too. This one is the gift of all the inhabitants of the village of Vejaja. There are 631 inscriptions here detailing individual gifts. They're all inscribed on the piece gifted. Only 2 are royal, so that the donors at Sanchi are all ordinary folk.
The era of Sanchi's rebuilding in the 1st century BC was a confused time for Indian politics. The empire founded by Ashoka had broken apart, but his roads and some of his administration remained. Both were useful to the merchants who grew rich on trade reaching from Burma to the Mediterranean. History relates the Roman Pliny's complaint that all Rome's coffers were being emptied out to pay for India's fine muslin fabric. Most artisans belonged to flourishing trade guilds. Guilds such as the potters, metalworkers, and carpenters had a great deal of power, owning buildings, making loans, setting prices, and making charitable and religious donations.
This inscription tells us that the pillar was carved and gifted by the Ivory Carvers Guild from nearby Vidisha. The great stupa was the result of collective and multiple patronage on a monumental scale. Buddhists, non-Buddhists too, contributed in the hope of earning merit for the next life, and perhaps also for the pleasure of seeing their name inscribed in stone for all to appreciate. And we may be pretty certain that donors made a trip to the Sanchi hill to view their contributions.
The masterworks of the great stupa are the magnificently carved toranas, or gateways that welcome the visitor into the sacred space. The Sanchi monks did not lay down any specific plan for the sculptures. Popular scenes like the story of the Buddha's former life as an elephant are repeated several times. Donors may have simply chosen their favorite stories. The reliefs on the four gateways are vibrant portraits of the everyday world of the 1st century BC. There are festival processions, musicians playing and dancers dancing, people picnicking, women pounding grain in a village, and elephants bathing in lotus ponds. But something else is going on here. The Buddha is present. The elephant is the Buddha in a former life. The village is where the Buddha performed a major miracle. And the procession is in honor of his relics. These carvings are religious teachings in stone, given charm and originality by the addition of myriads of details of ordinary life.
Visitors to Sanchi would have seen these reliefs as they ritually circled the stupa, walking in clockwise direction. It would take several visits to do justice to the volume of sculpture here, so like most first-time visitors, we'll just take in the highlights. The favorite story was that of Prince Siddhartha, who became the Buddha, meaning the enlightened one, and second in popularity were the stories of his many previous lives. But the sculptors of 2,000 years ago faced one critical problem. How were they to portray perfection? More importantly, was it appropriate to depict him in human shape? After all, he had been born on earth 550 times. Finally, as Prince Siddhartha, he had freed himself from rebirth, freed himself from the body. Was it at all proper to confine once more in bodily form that free, enlightened spirit? Artists came up with an ingenious solution. They created a unique visual system of symbols, of traces, to indicate the presence of the Buddha. An empty seat to show his seated presence, a slab of stone to suggest his walking path, a ladder for his descent, footprints to indicate soil upon which he trod, a sheltering parasol to indicate space he occupied. Here, Prince Siddhartha abandons his luxurious palace, leaves behind his beautiful wife and newborn son, and rides off to seek the true meaning of life. These are not 5 different horses, but 5 repetitions of the same horse to show its movement in space and time. At one end, Siddhartha emerges from the palace. Note the parasol hovering above the horse. At the other end, he dismounts. Note his footprints. His loyal groom, Chandaka, takes leave of the prince by touching his feet. And then the riderless horse returns to the palace, without the parasol, which stays with the footprints. The storyteller made no attempt to distinguish one scene from the next. Instead, the story flows continuously across the space. Take a standard comic strip and remove the vertical frames. What would you have? This popular ancient method that we call continuous narration.
After leaving the parental home, The prince studied with various sages, but made no particular progress, and finally sat down to meditate beneath a peepal tree, vowing not to get up until he had attained enlightenment. Demons attempted to distract Siddhartha from his meditation. They're being conquered. We see them tumbling in every direction. The battle is described in an ancient Buddhist text.
And the company of Mara fled this way and that way, so that not even two were left together. Throwing off their clothes and their turbans, they fled, each one straight on before him.
The gods came to congratulate the Buddha after his victory, crying out,
"Come, let us honor the victor."
There's such a difference between the magnificently expressive figures of Mara's army and the sedate, anonymous, almost lifeless gods. Could the right and left halves be the work of two different artists? Or is it just that the world of chaos stimulated the artist's imagination more than the world of harmony? In the midst of these tales of moral and spiritual perfection, we encounter beauty of another kind. These striking figures, yakshis of semi-divine character, serve as decorative brackets at the corner of each gateway. Perhaps it surprises you to see wide curving hips, sensuous torso, high rounded breasts in a Buddhist holy site. Would they not distract the monk intent on salvation? But here, the beautiful female form, provocatively poised beneath a tree, serves as an auspicious decoration for the holy site. There once were 24 such forms, large and small, at Sanchi, 6 on each of the 4 gateways. The emphatic repetition speaks of their significance. From ancient times, woman stood for fertility, which in turn implied growth, abundance, prosperity. From there, it was a short step to viewing woman as a symbol of everything fortunate. What a far cry from the Western vision of woman as evil, of Eve who brought about man's exile from paradise. The male figure, too, has his role to play at Sanchi as guardian. Each one is surprisingly sensuous. Though sometimes unarmed, the stance of these figures speaks of their power to protect the ancient shrine.
As Buddhism spread along the trade routes, other temples and monasteries arose at key points along the roads. South and west of Sanchi, on the cliffs of the coastal hills, known as the Western Ghats, a remarkable series of rock-cut cave monasteries was created. The largest and the most distinctive chapel is Karle, known for the quality of its sculptural ornamentation. The face of the rock has been carved to resemble a many-storied building, and the surface is decorated with sculptured figures. Here, the semi-divine Yakshi and Yaksha of Sanchi have been transformed into human-loving couples. Their flowing lines and sensuous treatment link them closely with the tree maidens and guardians of Sanchi. Like the female figures of Sanchi, they represent fertility, growth and abundance, fitting ornaments for both sacred and secular monuments. These couples, like the other figures here, were donated by specific individuals. One couple was given by the monk Bhadasama. Life-sized elephants that support the sidewall mansions were also individual gifts. One was given by the Venerable Reverend Indradeva, whose title clearly indicates that he was a senior Buddhist dignitary. We even have this inscription stating that the wealthy merchant Sheth Bhutapala gave a donation to enable completion of this monumental project. Karle's immense interior stretches 37 meters into the side of the mountain, with a stupa looming at the inner end. Rock-cut structures like this defy our ideas of architecture. Rather than pile stone on stone, the builders scooped out the stone from inside the solid mountain, creating negative space within. The process is more like sculpting than building. The Buddhist rock-cut temple creates an atmosphere of reverence and mystery. Its size suggests that it was used as a public space, accommodating crowds of pilgrims who came to worship. Karle and Sanchi continued to be lively and active centers of Buddhism, growing and changing with the faith. When images of Buddha began to be created, statues were placed within each entrance to the great stupa. Sanchi flourished until the 11th century, when Buddhism declined over all of India. For several centuries, Sanchi lay neglected and in ruins. This 19th century watercolor reveals its condition before archaeological restoration was begun in the early years of the 20th century, hearkening perhaps to the imprecation carved on a gateway.
He who dismantles a gateway or rail of this monument shall incur the weight of the 5 great sins.
Sanchi is once again a magnet for pilgrims from around the Buddhist world. More than 2,000 years after the first stones were heaped up, the ancient Buddhist chants again reverberate within the sacred precincts.
Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami.
Ra, Apollo, Mitra, Surya, Amaterasu, Aditya, Bhaskara. By these names, many cultures in many ages have evoked the sun as a deity. Giver of life and fertility, the sun is a worldwide emblem of spiritual enlightenment, banishing darkness from men's minds as he banishes night from the earth. Across India, worshippers daily greet the rising of the sun in rituals that evoke the age-old poetry of the Vedas.
We have come up out of darkness, seeing the higher light around us, going to the sun, the God among gods, the highest light.
As if an echo of these verses, a king and his builders honored the sun god. On India's eastern coast, they created a vast stone chariot that towered towards the sky and stunned all visitors with its luxuriant wealth of sculpture. While other far older temples stand intact, this masterpiece is today a shattered ruin. But even in its crumbled state, its massive conception and sumptuous ornamentation inspire awe. Konarak faces the eastern ocean, out of which Surya, the sun god, rises on his daily journey across the sky. In ancient myth, the sun fights his way out of darkness, defeating the demons that hold him captive. The worshipper is a participant in this battle, tossing water droplets that turn into thunderbolts and aid the sun in his daily victory. Konarak's ancient names, Konaraka and Konaditya, mean the sun's corner and indicate the site's ancient significance as a center of sun worship. The Brahma Purana describes the region we know today as Orissa, calling it Ondra Desha.
There in the Bharata subcontinent is a land that bestows heavenly pleasures and liberation. It is situated on the southern ocean and it is well known as Ondra Desha. The sun god is the lord of that land.
Around the 2nd century, an Iranian cult devoted to the sun began to spread throughout northern India. Early Indian images of the sun god show him clothed in a Persian tunic and boots. As Hinduism evolved, the sun continued to be worshipped in Orissa along with other gods such as Vishnu and Shiva. When the 13th century Orissan ruler Narasimhadeva decided to erect a temple in celebration of his military triumphs, he chose to honor the sun god. The temple was conceived on a grand scale as the sun's chariot. It stands on a massive, richly ornamented platform with 12 wheels on each side. The 24 wheels probably symbolize the 12 months with their 2 halves marked by the waxing and the waning moon. Traditionally, the sun's chariot is pulled by 7 horses, of which remnants still stand. The horses probably represent the 7 days of the week. A stepped pyramidal roof rises high to cover the square entrance hall. We can still admire the gorgeous carving around the entrance doorway, but the hall itself can no longer be entered. To prevent its collapse, British archaeologists ordered it to be completely filled in with rubble. Behind the entrance hall was the sanctum, enclosing the image of the god and topped by an imposing tower. Most of that sanctum and all of the tower is now gone. But the sun god's presence is still powerful. At this height on the north, west and south of the sanctuary are 3 shrines to the deity.